Police officers of Reddit, what criminal actually impressed you with their criminal skills? We had a guy who ran one of those we buy your gold places. Typically he did a moderate business, but it just wasn't enough for the lifestyle he wanted. So he decided to rob a better jewelry store. He found one that sold only very high quality jewelry and was about 300 miles away from his house. He visited them one day and got the name of the safe they used, noted the type of alarm, cameras, etc., then went home and bought the exact same safe. He spent months planning how to break into the safe without possibly tripping the alarm, but he wasn't having any luck. He was dedicated, kept working on it, and finally came up with a plan. He got his brother and another person and they turned off their cell phones at home, then drove to the store, and got there in the middle of the night. They climbed onto the roof, cut a hole in the ceiling, and purposefully tripped the alarm. They put the ceiling tiles back and laid them down on the roof. The owner came and the police came. The owner checks out the store, and nothing looks wrong. Police haven't seen anyone, so the owner decided his alarm must have malfunctioned. He turns off the alarm, because hey, he'll be back here in a couple of hours to open, sends the officer away and he goes home. The thief, able to hear the system, is disabled from his hiding spot and then opens a hole in the ceiling again. The casual cat drop into the business and basically wipes the place out. Estimates ran around 4 to 6 million in gold. They take all the gold home where he starts to slowly mix it in with his regular business. He melts all the gold down to sell, so it's not like the pieces can be identified. They generate some fake business receipts, but lots of his transactions are cash-based and a small business keeping sloppy records is nothing new. Meanwhile, the jewelry store owner feels like a complete idiot, and the cops only find one lone cigarette butt. Inside, no prints. They must have worn gloves. This police also get a security image from a business outside of a black truck coming and going at the right time, but the license plate is obscured and the thieves are covered up enough the poor quality camera can't catch much that's helpful. I believe the cigarette came back with a partial match to one of the sidekicks. Now mind you, a partial DNA match is pretty mediocre evidence at best, even though juries love even partial DNA, that gets the police looking in the right direction. The IRS has noticed our thief doubled his income that year, and then the next year had a slump but somehow managed to buy a whole heaping lot of stuff, with cash that had to be unreported. He bought a Land Rover, some sports cars, can't remember the type, a $400K house, and a $30K pool, all with cash that was unaccounted for. A check of cell phone records had one of the cell phones pinging about an hour away from the crime scene in the middle of the night. And the truck he had was the same type of truck that showed up at the scene. Because one of them turned his phone on and called his wife to tell her he was out with said guys, but at a bar. It was a lot of little things, but it was enough altogether to make a pretty decent case and a jury convicted him at trial. Date: my girlfriend is depressed because she misses her ex. My girlfriend Jess asked me if we could take a week apart to figure things out. I asked her if we were breaking up and she said no, just taking a break and giving each other some space so we can think clearly. So a day goes by and we're on our break not really talking. Then all of a sudden, late at night, she asks me if she can come over that night because she says she misses me. Okay, I say. I let her come over and she spends the night. Next day, she asks to come over again. I say sure and she does. At this point I start getting suspicious for a couple reasons. 1. Her northern regions were recently shaved, and she has very rarely ever done that with me and we hadn't even done anything together in like a couple weeks. I asked her and she just said yeah she shaved after work. 2. She was wearing a bracelet, which I had never seen before. I asked her about it and she didn't even respond. The next day she went to work. While she works she usually leaves her phone in her car, so I drove to her work to snoop through her phone. I found her phone in the car and looked through it. I saw so many messages to her ex, Tom. She was telling him how she wanted him. Those nights she came over to my house late? She was spending the evening with him earlier and banging. She sent him explicit photos of herself as well as myself. Turns out Tom is bi and thinks I'm very attractive. I felt sick to my stomach and my heart was racing. I put the phone down, messaged her on Facebook to never talk to me again, and blocked her on everything, even her number. Later on in the day I was working myself and she found me in my office. She very loudly asked me what was going on in front of my coworkers. I told her we could go outside and talk and we did. I told her that I saw everything on her phone and threatened to press charges for showing Tom my explicit photos. She yelled at me, called me crazy, and said I can't be with someone as insecure as you and then stormed off. I avoided her for the rest of the day. Later at the end of the work day, she came by again, this time smiling and pouting, very softly asking me if we could talk. I said sure, and we went outside again. First thing she did was threaten to get the police involved because I looked through her phone without permission, which she said was a form of breaking and entering. I kinda laughed and told her she committed a crime too, so if she wants to play that game we can. Then she started tearing up and asking me, why would you do that? And I asked why she'd send those photos to Tom. I did not actually care about the fact my photos were sent, I was more concerned about hers. She said it was for validation from Tom. I asked why she would even be with me if she felt that way about him. She said that she loved me and wanted to marry me and have kids with me. I asked if they had done anything. She said no, but part of me knows she's lying. As I was sitting there listening to all this, a part of me wanted to just hug her and hold her and tell her we're gonna work through this together. But then I realized that the girl I loved was never real. I just loved the idea of her. That this girl sitting in front of me with her fake tears and apologies was just going to lie again. That if I got back with her it would just enable her further. So at the end of the conversation when she asked are we really done forever? We can't just work through this? I told her no, and that I was never going to see her or speak to her again. To which she just stood up, said if you say so, have a nice life. And slowly walked away. After I got home from work, literally 10 minutes later my doorbell rang and it was her. I ignored it but 20 minutes later she was still ringing it. So I opened the door and she's crying, begging for me back, telling me she'll do anything I ask her to do to make this work, that she loves me and only me and wants to marry me. And have kids with me and move far away with me. I asked her, if all that was true, why she'd do any of those things she did. She just cried and said she didn't know, that she's stupid and was looking for validation, that she has abandonment issues from her childhood and from her father chasing her around the house with a knife when he was intoxicated gave her long-lasting trauma. After we talked I basically just stood my ground and told her there's no chance of making this work anymore and sent her home. She asked me to unblock her in case of emergency, and I only agreed for the next week or so while this settles down. The next day someone was at my door again. I opened the door and once again it is her, this time looking mad at me. Right away she asked me, why am I the only one being held accountable here? Why aren't you holding yourself accountable for breaking into my phone and invading my privacy? To which I just said, I fully know and accept what I did was wrong and I apologize. But that does not lessen what you did in any way. She then said, if you don't hear from me again, it's probably because I'm thinking of taking my life. And I will do it, I don't care, and I'll blame you in my note. Goodbye. She got in her car and drove away. It has been a week since I have seen her. How I got fired and rehired the same day. I was working in the corporate headquarters of a very large telco. I was responsible for the email system for HQ, about 1,100 users at the time. My boss was a guy I'll call S. S was the site manager for the outsourcer, and was the direct manager of all the contractor sysadmins. The customer contact was a guy named J. J was what they called an IT planner, basically a systems architect. He had dotted line responsibility over all the sysadmins, including me. I also had a backup there, named B. B was a competent sysadmin. We normally kept staff in the office from 8 to 6 on workdays, with an on-call rotation for certain specialty areas, including email. Back then, we carried a pager for on-call duty. My on-call rotation was 1 week on, 1 week off. One Saturday night, at around 3:30 a.m., my home phone rang. My wife answered and it was Jay calling. She grumpily handed the phone to me. Now my wife and I had just gotten home, having been out for much of the night with our neighbors. I was positively hammered at this point. Jay informed me that there was an email outage, and that I needed to remote in and get it back up immediately, and then drive to the office to start a root cause analysis. I informed him that I was in no condition to drive and asked what B told him when he called the on-call pager. Jay told me that he didn't call the on-call pager because this was way too serious of a problem to trust the backup sysadmin. He wanted me working on this, and that if I can't be relied upon to do my job when I was needed, he'd find someone else who could, and hung up the phone. I went back to sleep. The next morning I had an email from B, telling me that Jay had called him at home. It was a very simple issue. Our backup software went screwy and started writing out hundreds of gigabytes of temp files, which filled up a critical volume on our production email server. Temp files deleted, email services restarted, problem kicked over to our backup software SME to figure out what happened. Total downtime after B got the call was about 15 minutes. The next day, I arrived at the office to a note from S, my manager, asking me to come see him ASAP. I went to S' office, and sitting there was Jay, who was in the process of demanding that I be fired immediately for being intoxicated at work. From there, the conversation went something like this. But he wasn't at work. He was at home, and wasn't in the on-call rotation this weekend. Jay, I don't want to hear about the on-call rotation. He needs to be ready to work when I tell him to. I can't rely on an alco, and I want him gone. If he's not on call, he's free to do whatever he wants with his time. Jay, not as long as he works for me. Jay then demands that I hand my office badge to him, and calls security from S' phone to have me escorted out of the building. I'm in absolute disbelief at this point. S gets up and goes off to points unknown, just as security arrives to see me out to the parking lot. As I'm driving off, I see Jay's boss, I'll call her M. M is running across the street to the parking lot. Strange, but I was more focused on how the hell I was going to explain this to my wife when I got home. I got home, and my wife was sitting on the couch, just absolutely livid. Now this was really weird, because I hadn't told her what happened yet. Those mother effers fired you. I'm confused as hell at this point. My wife told me that M called her, and that I need to call her back as soon as possible. Come to find out, when S had went off, he was going to M's office to explain the situation and keep him from firing me. M heard from S, and freaked the hell out. When I saw her running across the street, she was trying to catch me in the parking lot before I left to tell me to come back in. When M couldn't find my car, she went back into the office and called the house, intending to leave me a voicemail, but got my wife instead. M told my wife what had happened. Promised to rein Jay in, and asked her to tell me to come back into the office to sort it out. So I let them stew for a while. M called about 20 minutes after I got home. We let her go to the machine. S called as well, just as my wife and I went out to get some lunch. Over lunch, my wife and I talked about how we would handle this, and we decided to talk to them to see if we could work this out. We got back home to 3 more voicemails from M and S about 30 seconds after we walked in the door. The phone rang again. This time it was Jay, obviously on speakerphone. Jay apologized to me, and asked me to come back to work the next day. I agreed, but as he hung up, I could hear M say to him, Jay, you're an effing idiot. I worked there for another year after that, before another Jay mess up made me leave once and for all.